When he came back, he found out that it was documented, by the way, and placed in the congressional record. He found that President Carter knew that the hostages were going to be taken. He knew approximately how long they were going to be kept. He knew that they were there for a reason. And the release of the hostages was not negotiated by the State Department of the United States of America. The release of the hostages in Iran was negotiated by a negotiator of Chase Manhattan Bank in New York. And the hostages were kept, and America held hostage while the bankers got the Shah's money in their banks before he was killed, and in turn got much of the money of Iran. And do you wonder that Iran is mad at us today? After the shenanigans we pulled to get their money into Chase Manhattan Bank so it could remain solvent and be one of the wealthiest institutions in the world today? That is what Jonathan May is speaking of, and we continue.
And became progressively worse and ultimately was shipped off to die. Not before all his assets had been frozen, which doesn't make much sense until you realize the ploy of the globalists. That's something of red herring, but it's interesting. In 1983, we became aware of the fact that a group of very, very quiet bank holding companies, which are authorized under Regulation Y, Section 225.4 of USC.
All right, he says that they formed a group of bank holding companies. The international bankers' banks did, and the reason they formed them was so that they could not be held responsible, so that Chase Manhattan Chemical Bank and J.P. Morgan's bank could not be held responsible for the money that the Arabs had been put into their banks. They formed bank holding companies who in turn would loan out the money to the third world countries. Knowing that the third world countries were going to go broke, after they had already destroyed the Shah, had the money in their banks, loaning out exorbitant amount of money, determining they were going broke, and letting the bank holding companies hold these loans, knowing what was going to happen when these third world countries went broke.
To extend credit, also to do it internationally incidentally, but to extend credit wherever they feel like it, under whatever terms they feel like it, under Regulation Y. We became aware of the fact that those companies were receiving loans from the prime banks to buy foreclosed real property in the form of agricultural property and businesses with bricks and mortar.
One was for the purpose of loaning money to the third world countries. The second bank holding company was for the purpose of borrowing money from the international bankers' banks in order to purchase farmland. Isn't this rather interesting? To purchase farmland and farms and certain corporations in the United States of America. So here we have two bank holding companies. One loaning money to third world countries from the Arabs' money coming through the international bankers' banks. One purchasing farmland and certain businesses in America that are making a lot of money. The farmland and the businesses will continue to make money. The third world countries are designated to go under.
From liquidations and foreclosures and bankruptcies which were being effected with by the FDIC and the FSLIC, which are indeed subsidiaries, at least totally under the control of the Federal Reserve Board. We couldn't understand this.
And literally dozens of banks weekly all over America are being bought. Who has the money to buy these banks, by the way? And where did they get the money to buy these banks from? It's being bought by the high oil price money that goes to the Arabs, deposited into the international bankers' banks. They buy the banks that are intentionally being closed around America, some of which are still solvent. They're also buying the farmland of America through the farmers that are being put into bankruptcy because of the high American dollar in relation to foreign currencies, which I'll deal with that subject tomorrow afternoon. And they're doing it all with our own money, which pays for gasoline at the pump, which goes to the Arabs, to the international bankers' banks, to the bank holding companies which purchases the banks back in America that are going under today. If you wonder where they're getting all the money from to do these things, now you know. It's your own money through gas prices.
And between 1983 and 1985, researched it and still couldn't understand it. At the end of 1985, we were approached by an emissary from an emissary of President Marcos and President Suharto and another from Indonesia with a severe problem that they had. And that problem they had was that, having borrowed all the money they borrowed, they needed more money. But the only way that the IMF were prepared to lend them money was if they eliminated their own currency, became dollar denominated, subsequently eliminated cash altogether, and went on to a unilateral, centralized credit card system, which was part of their social security system, part of their identity system.
I must stop. I gave this such a long period of time because you need to get the entire statement. Marcos, an emissary from Marcos in the Philippines, you do know that Marcos was deposed 1 year ago, and Indonesia, came to Jonathan May and said, the international banks in New York, a representative from those banks have just come to us and said, we will forgive all of your loans. You cannot pay them back. You can't pay back the interest. You can't pay back the principal. Well, we'd like to make you a bargain. We will forgive your loans. By the way, whose money was that they had loaned out to these third world countries? It wasn't theirs. Whose was it? It was the Arabs' money, because of high oil prices that the people of the world had paid. And they said, we will forgive your loans, your principal and your interest. You never have to pay it back if you will do the following. Number one, do away with your national currency. Does this sound familiar? Do away with your national currency. Dollar denominate your new currency. Go to a debit card system instead of a currency system. And if you will give us perpetual rights to all natural resources in your country. Just after that, by the way, Marcos in the Philippines was deposed. Why? He told the international bankers to get out of his country. He would not give them sovereignty over his country. And here's what happened.
Everybody in the country, social security number was synonymous with a credit number. And then their central bank was to act as the wholesaler for credit, which was extended to it by the new super bank, which was announced by Paul Volcker on the 27th of October 1985 and subsequently almost immediately ratified by Ronald Reagan, the 6 digits of the name of which all are, the digits of the 3 names of which all add up to 6, incidentally. A further contingent condition of the benevolence of the IMF, and I'm being facetious, was that in order to help the economy of that country, those countries, the IMF were going to nominate external, non-domestic corporations to properly engineer and exploit and excavate the minerals of those countries, the natural resources of those countries, in return for perpetual royalties and in return for those same companies' nomination of all the ancillary companies that would be involved with the exploration and excavation, thereby bringing prosperity to the nation. But Marcos was sharp enough to pick up the word perpetual and realized quite obviously that in so doing he would be signing away the sovereignty of his nation.
So Marcos realized what the international bankers were doing to him, that if he gave them perpetual rights to all of the minerals of his country, even though the international bankers had promised that they would send in corporations to develop these minerals, but that they themselves would get the profits from those minerals, but yet it would put the people in the Philippines to work. Yet Marcos knew that if he gave them this contract of perpetual rights, that he was giving up the sovereignty of his country to the international bankers' banks and to the International Monetary Fund. Marcos at this point told them, I will not do it, get out of my country, and it was only a matter of weeks after that that Marcos was deposed by whom? None other than riots incited by payment of the international bankers' banks themselves, as Jonathan May continues to show.